Well, thank you for joining us for the Southern Nightmares reading series. This is a monthly online event presented by the Atlanta Chapter of the Horror Writers Association. We have been spotlighting both Atlanta Horror Writers Association members, plus members from around the world. Tonight, we're going to have something a little special and focus just on our chapter members. I'm Alex Hoflick, your host for the event. Before we get to our readings for the night, wanted to take a minute to remember Peter Adam Salomon. This evening, we're going to be showcasing stories from a new anthology, Georgia Gothic, that includes participation from a number of members of the Atlanta chapter of the Horror Writers Association. I had the pleasure of editing this book with Vicki Greer and Peter Adam Salomon. Just about a month ago now, Peter passed away and in his sleep. He was a founding member of the Atlanta chapter of the HWA and was serving as our member at large on the chapter board. So that, Peter's novels, All Those Broken Angels and 8 minutes, 32 seconds were both nominated for the Bram Stoker Award for Superior Achievement in Young Adult Fiction. And his first two novels were named a book all young Georgians should read. Were named a book all young Georgians should read by the Georgia Center for the Book. And Peter founded both National Dark Poetry Day earlier this month on October 7th and the annual International Horror Poetry Showcase for the Horror Writers Association. And he edited the first two volumes of the Horror Poetry Showcase. So we're dedicating all of this tonight to Peter, and I'll be sharing the poem that he put together for this anthology, and I hope this engineer doesn't mangle it too badly. So wanted to thank you again for joining us tonight. Our first reader tonight is a new reader that we haven't featured before, Jamie Grimes. Jamie is a writer, editor, document designer, occasional English professor, and full-time curmudgeon. He holds an MA in professional writing from Kennesaw State University, where he also wrangles cats and occasionally provides information system support. He lives with his far superior wife, his indefatigable, I have no idea how to pronounce that word, Jamie, and the platonic ideal of dog. How do you pronounce indefatigable?
We're going to go with that. I'm a writer.
That's entirely fair. So, so you are, one of the things that has shaped your story tonight is growing up in Middle Georgia. What do you want to, how has that influenced what you write, and what about Middle Georgia do you want to make sure that people know about to try and understand? Because there's Atlanta, and then there's, you got Atlanta, you got the mountains, you got the beach, and then there's, that space.
Everything else. Yeah, I don't think people outside of the South realize that the South has more than the stereotypical South and Atlanta. Especially where I grew up. I was in a mixed race family. I grew up in the black side of a small town that was very segregated. And even on my side of town, there were little pockets of segregation because you had the old school agrarian people, and then you had people just trying to get by, trying to get through school and get out, and then you had people who were very much stuck there, and they were heavy into a drug game that was growing at the time, and they were posturing at being gangsters, a lot of them, and this story came together because I was thinking about how sometimes those things butt up against each other and cause problems.
I appreciate you sharing that with us. I'm not sure that I can set this up any better, so I'm going to turn it over to you with something from I Will Not Walk in Darkness.
That is correct.
All right.
All right. It started the way most bad things in my life start. It started with a girl, Nia. She wasn't but 19, maybe 20, young enough, regardless, that she had too much living ahead of her to go getting in deep with the kind of people she was getting in with. The kind of people don't care for nobody, not in a meaningful way, not unless they can get something useful out of them. Those was the people she got away from when I heard her rattling around in my coops in the dead of night like a fox looking for an easy meal. I might have shot her if I'd done much more drinking before I got ready for bed. As it stood, she got punishment enough catching an eyeful of my old wrinkled ass busting out the screen door with nothing between me and my sensitive parts but a pair of old boxers with loose elastic and some shameful stains. Thank the Lord for backhanded blessings, I guess, because the full moonlight would expose my indignity, gave me a clear view of the girl, muddy, clothes all tore up. She wasn't crying no more, but you could tell she had been. Streaky makeup, eyes was swollen, bruises on top of it all. Some blood, nothing worrisome. Scratches mostly, like she'd run headlong through some brush. As soon as she saw my shotgun, she came out from behind the coop with her hands up like I was about to put her under arrest. Now, miss, I ain't no cop, I said, but I am mighty curious what it is you're doing way out here in the dead of night. And you know what she said to that? She didn't say a damn thing. She threw up right then. And when she was done, she just went on and passed out face down in it. Now, I wasn't in the best mindset to begin with, and nerves being what they was, but with what had just transpired and all, I didn't think to call the police right away. Instead, I drug this girl up out the dirt and puke, put her up on my couch, took a wet paper towel and wiped her face clean. Laying there, she ain't looked like much more than a child. And that made me think of my own. And that made me go for another drink. She cried in her sleep, real crying, like what was going on in her head was something more than nightmares. I couldn't help but think it had to do with what had happened to her out in the woods. It wasn't much longer till I knew the cause of her troubles. I mean, it knocked right on my door. I had half a mind not to answer. Had enough going on as it was, but the knocking kept on, and the longer it did, the more restless she got. I cracked the door a little bit, peeked out at the kid standing there. Wasn't nothing wrong with him that I could see, except one of his hands was wrapped in an ice pack. I didn't care much for the sight of him, truth be told. White folks around here would have pegged him for a thug on sight. Content of his character be damned. But for me, it wasn't his saggy pants or his too big football jersey or all them rings sparkling in the night. He had a look about him. Looked like no good. Like he thought too much of himself and was bound to be pissed off if you ain't feel the same. He studied me like he'd never seen a good country boy in his life. And then he ain't looked my way no more. Because my shotgun had his attention. I'm looking for my girl. He sounded like he was from up north, and not Atlanta north, the real north. I got cousins up around Detroit. He sounded a little like that. I said, son, you don't look old enough to have no kids, knowing damn well what he meant, this young woman on my couch. Couldn't help myself. The way I come to understand it, man can't claim ownership on nobody, except maybe his children, and even that don't last once they're grown. He was smart enough to get my meeting, I'll give him that. Got him more flustered than it should have, got him angry. He kept looking past me into my house, and I thought I'd done a good enough job keeping him from seeing her, but maybe I ain't. Maybe he saw something clued him in. Definitely did not like what he saw. You playing me? The look in his eyes turned deadly serious. I'd say I never saw a look like that in somebody so young, but that wouldn't exactly be the truth. There's plenty of angry young brothers wasting away around here. Ain't but so much opportunity for a comfortable life. It's enough to put 100 years of hurt on a young man's spirit. I said, no, ain't much for games. You come knocking on my door when I'm asleep, you're not gonna catch me at my finest. Best be on your way. I see any girl look like she belonged to you, I'll tell her you stop by, don't you worry. Boy straightened up, puffed out his chest, looked like he was about to growl. I gripped tight on my shotgun, and that's where his eyes went again. All right, he said, you do that. Don't need to be in any trouble about it, feel me? I understand what you're saying, if that's what you mean. I kept on poking. Not my brightest move in retrospect, but when I get someone on the ropes, I just can't help myself. And from there, shenanigans.
All kinds of delightful, dark, eldritch shenanigans and
Oh,
some,
murder's most foul.
you know, nothing good can come from, no good deed goes unpunished.
Exactly.
For sure.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I know you've your obviously superior wife and your little monster downstairs carving pumpkins. Do y'all have any plans for Halloween?
I think we're just doing trick-or-treating and scaring the neighborhood children as best we can. We have a couple of animatronics that we're going to put out. We added a 7-foot Krampus to the family this year. So he's out the window right now, and he'll be going outside in the yard. And we just try to make the best of it for the people in the neighborhood.
Good to do some adoption. If bring them into the home. If they're cold, if you're cold, they're cold.
Yeah, I know. For the price of less than a cup of coffee a day, you too can have a Krampus demon.
So, what are some of the other things that you really look forward to for this time of year?
Oh God, this time of year. I mean, it's hard to look past Halloween in this house.
Right.
It's Halloween from September 1st until the day after Christmas, it feels like.
Right.
Yeah. So it's that and writing and just trying to enjoy the season.
Halloween is the absolute best holiday of the year. There's no there's no obligations that go along with it. There's it's all about it's all joy.
I used to not be big on it, and then my wife is huge into it, and then we had a kid, and the kid is huge into it. So now I'm also huge into it. So I have to stop being lazy and actually do something.
So what are you dressing the little monster as?
He decided he wanted to be a glow-in-the-dark cow skeleton. So he has a cow mask that is totally unrelated to his human skeleton costume that he will be wearing, and he's going to do his thing. He's going to let his freak flag fly, and we're not going to get between him and that. That
it's a good level of performance art. I reminds me of saw Pet Shop Boys, and they had somebody in a morph suit and a cow skull dancing the whole time that had nothing to do with the song. But it's just one of those things where it's like, all right, you do your own dance.
Yeah, children are terrifying. They're little pots of random that are just the most awful things.
Yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to share that with us, and look forward to more people diving in and getting to read the rest of your fantastic story.
Oh, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So our next reader tonight is C.O. Davidson. C.O. Davidson is a writer and English professor. She co-edited the book, Monster of Films, Fiction and Fable, and she won the July 2021 Flash Fiction Contest for Cemetery Gates Media. Her writing appears in Dark Moon Digest and in the anthology Generation X and the upcoming Georgia Gothic. She and her husband, Andy, have many cats. So in order to kind of set up your story, Dream House, what is the scariest thing about going out and shopping for a home other than ghosts?
And the price.
Oh, yeah, I am glad that I do not need to try and find a new house right now because
Yeah.
wow.
I know right after we got our house, it came home and there's a Florida room that's attached to the back, and it was a rainstorm. And I just walked in and I heard this noise and I was like, did I leave something running? And it was just water coming through the roof. And I had just owned the house like less than a week. And I was like, I can't be an adult. I can't handle this. So that was the worst. New
Yeah.
home ownership.
Yeah. Welcome to new home ownership. Here's something that breaks.
Right.
Oh. Yeah. Well, is there anything else that you would like to share with us before you share something from Dreamhouse?
Well, the story is based in actually a true experience that Andy and I had, though we are not Alice and Rick, the characters in the story, but we have some similarities, just a few. But if I had written down everything that actually happened in that real experience, people would say, oh, that's too crazy. You got to cut that out of the story. No one's going to believe that. So
Awesome.
Sort of based in truth and imagination.
That is always the best thing. So you never know which part, including the haunting, is not quite there.
Right.
So let me turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Alex. My story is called Dream House, and it's the story of Alice and Rick. They're two academics who are on the market to buy a bigger house. Alice thinks that they've actually found it in this pre-Civil War farmhouse, and the scene I'm about to read takes place well into the story, after the present owners, Todd and Cheryl, have been showing Alice and Rick around the house. And what Alice has come to realize is there's something deeply unsettling at work between Todd and Cheryl, and it might just be something to do with the house itself. The room was pale blue. Condensation ran down the long windows like raindrops, partially obscuring the trees outside. At the far end of the enclosed porch were a chair and white desk. Above them, shelves of books and photos of the beach, the mountains, this house, all empty of people. A model red biplane hung over the desk on fishing wire, slowly turning. A sock with camel. Rick had one model drying right now on the narrow kitchen counter back home. Alice felt the room tilt. Where am I? It's a cozy room, Cheryl said in a flat voice. Alice saw a stuffed bear on a sofa under the long window, neck seam split. Alice picked it up and held it to her chest. I had a Paddington when I was a kid, she said softly. Still have him. I thought I sewed him up. Cheryl twisted the hem of her shirt. We have to go back to Brunswick. Family. Alice looked up from the bear. It must be hard to leave. Y'all have done a lot of work here. Cheryl blinked, her glasses slightly fogged from her mask. It hasn't turned out how we hoped it would. The women stood across from each other. Alice could see herself holding the bear reflected in Cheryl's glasses. Cheryl held her arms out, reaching. Alice extended the bear to her, but Cheryl dropped her hands to her side. No one understands how big that space becomes, she says. Alice's reflection disappeared in the growing fog of Cheryl's glasses. Alice put the bear back on the sofa, carefully. I'm going to look for Rick. Back through the kitchen and out into the empty hallway, Alice went to the foot of the stairs and called up, Rick? No one answered. Then she saw the door shut across from the living room. She opened it and stepped into a shockingly warm air in dark blue, like the waters of the Gulf Stream. A hand-painted mural of sea creatures on the walls, schools of angelfish, starfish, sharks, dolphins. An octopus emerged from around the window. A narwhal jumped a crowded bookshelf. Jellyfish swam across the ceiling. Alice stared at these. At the center of the room, on a round blue rug, a bed shaped like a boat, complete with a masthead of a pirate at its foot, painted along the side, Thomas. Suddenly, Alice knew what she had long suspected. Her own child had been a boy. Last summer at Tybee, she had watched a small dark-haired boy peel from his parents to mold a sandcastle. Such precision, such concentration, at times biting his lower lip, like Rick when he worked on his model planes. She looked down the beach to the mother occupied with her phone, back to the boy, who had Rick's dark hair, she imagined. She knew he was not her child, but she felt pulled like the tide to see him, to know him, small and quiet like her, but funny like Rick. She knew he loved fat books and a teddy bear with a split seam, but then the waves rolled in, the sandcastle fell. Alice's eyes burned. She pushed her hair from her forehead. She felt hot. The room pressed in, her nose and mouth filled with the stink of dead fish. Her stomach clenched. She backed out of the room, yanked her mask down to breathe. Sweat dried her face. She shivered. Wood creaked behind her. She turned to face an empty staircase. At the top, darkness contracted and expanded. She stumbled back, hitting the door frame. She glanced down and saw the last hash mark, 5 years, 3 feet, 6 inches. Voices at the top of the stairs. Rick and Todd were coming down. Todd, mask now pulled up, saying, "Some rich guy down the road got them to run fiber optic cable out here. Gives you fast as hell internet. I can do all my programming from home. Never have to leave. But then who goes anywhere anyway?" The men stopped at the last riser when they saw her. "Alice," Todd said, "you didn't see the upstairs." But Rick said nothing, his eyes wide with concern above his mask. He stepped off the stairs and went to Alice, put a hand on her shoulder. Alice fumbled her mask over her nose, even as the words spilled out. "It's okay, Rick can tell me about it. I don't know what I'd even do with it upstairs." Alice fell silent as Cheryl emerged from the kitchen. Cheryl's eyes locked on the open door behind Alice. Alice said, "This room, what's wrong with it?"
And that is a fantastic spot to leave us with. So was this actually one of the houses that you looked at when you were doing your house hunting?
This was actually after we had gotten this house. We just kind of, one of our things we like to do even before the pandemic was just drive around on Sundays. And there was a farmhouse that was actually in our county down the road. And it was pre-Civil War. And just like this house, it had been moved. So we actually had the opportunity to actually go to an open house. The real estate agent set it up for us. And there were several people on that day. And the pictures were amazing. And you pull up and you're like, huh, still kind of interesting. And then you go inside and it was just the weirdest vibe in that house. And it had a split down the middle because they used to cut houses in half to move them and they'd put them back together and there'd be a copper seam there. And so this house had been moved there and it just had this very strange vibe. And it's not in the story, but like a couple of months later, a friend of mine called me on the phone and she said, "You know that house across the street from us that you were looking at?" I was like, "Yeah." She said, "Well, it was just struck by lightning and it's on fire." So,
nice.
yeah. So it's not in the story, but there's kind of a reference to something like that at the end of the story. But I thought that was just too crazy.
Well, and that is a traditional literary way to cleanse houses that are wrong. I can think of well, there's the Fall of the House of Usher and
Right.
the
I guess the Overlook does that. The
yes,
Overlook.
the Picture in the House.
Yes.
There's several of those where, all right, it's struck by lightning and it burns down. So
yeah.
I can definitely see the inspiration. Yeah, your description of the copper seam in the story is really nice. that seems to be a little bit more elegant way to move stuff down the road. There's a historic house that got moved near my office where they work, and they had to rebuild. They had to take down the traffic signals and rebuild them in order to drive the house down the road, because they didn't cut that one in half.
Wow.
So cutting it in half seems a little bit more practical. Not quite as strong on the preservation sense,
Yeah.
but so to pivot a little bit, what is your favorite thing to do for Halloween?
Well, Halloween is like Christmas for horror writers. So it's the big build up, and then ta-da, the day is here and it's almost quiet. But we've been watching scary movies. We've been really into rewatching the Universal horror movies this
Nice.
time around. Been seeing some really interesting films. Shudder has a great collection. Criterion Channel has a great collection this season of horror movies. So that's really what we've been doing. We're going to carve a pumpkin this year, and we haven't done that in a few years. And I've been trying to do outfit of the day for Halloween this week.
Nice.
I think we're just going to enjoy the spooky vibe, but Halloween doesn't really end at October 31st. It doesn't.
No, every day is Halloween.
Every day is Halloween. Lisa Kroger had been asking for since you've been watching early 30s films, Lisa Kroger was asking for good suggestions for pre-code films. So outside of Universal, because everybody needs to go watch Universal horror films, are there any pre-code films that you would recommend? I don't know. I think this is sort of a cheat, because you just said outside of Universal, the Spanish version of Dracula.
No, that's not a cheat at all.
So
I'd share with folks about the Spanish language versions.
So if I know the story correctly, when the English Universal production would shut down for the day, a Spanish crew would come to set at night, and then they would film. And there's some additions that you don't see. The camera movement is so fluid. It's a lot bloodier and kind of kinkier and lyrical than the English version. And I love the Lugosi version, but this is my first time seeing the Spanish version, and it just blew me away. So I think everybody should watch it. And I think it is on the Criterion Channel right now, but you can probably find it on YouTube.
Awesome. Yeah, those are on my list to do for sure. And your recollection of the story matches up with my recollection of the story. So I think, yeah, I'm going to give you credit for.
Okay, for being right. I don't know. I think that's right, but it's definitely.
We're not going to make you cite sources.
Okay, good.
Not tonight. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Alex. It's exciting to be a part of Southern Nightmares, and it's definitely exciting to be a part of Georgia Gothic Anthology.
Yeah,
great.
I can't wait to share this anthology and the rest of your fantastic story with everybody.
Thanks. Well, have a good night. Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween. So our next reader is David Powell. David Powell has taught school, directed plays, played music, and portrayed zombies. But now he writes full-time, seeking out the pockets of chaos, burying the corners of the grid. You can read his work in Close to the Bone, Yellow Mama, Black Petals, Shotgun Honey, Calliope, Altered Reality Magazine, the HWA Poetry Showcase Volume 6, Fall into Fantasy 2020, Into the Glen, Under the Shade, and Manawalker Studios Flash Fiction Podcast. You can see his zombie portrayal in Dance of the Dead, and hear his voice acting in the podcast Archive 81, and also over on Pseudopod. David, thank you for joining us tonight.
Oh, my pleasure, Alex. Great to be here. Thanks.
I'm really glad to have you here, and I love you bring poetry into so much of your stuff, and you've got not only a story in this anthology, but you also contributed a poem as well. Making sure that we included poetry was an important thing to Peter. It's why we had to have him in there, because neither Vicky nor I are even with Peter helping us along in his tutelage, I still don't feel entirely qualified to really judge properly judge poetry. It takes a whole lot of time. So I will bug you about your story a little bit later, but why don't you tell us a little bit about your poem first, and then I guess follow that with a little sample of your story.
Okay. And I have to say, in terms of, Peter Salomon, I wouldn't be writing poetry if it weren't for him. He talked me into it. He said, yes, you can do this. And every objection I had, he had an answer for. And so he was just so encouraging throughout. So I really owe him a lot. This poem is called The Deadline, and it is based on one of the most shameful episodes of Georgia's history, I think, which is the prisoner of war camp that they had in Macon County, which had 45,000 people go through it during the war, and 13,000 of them died from starvation and unsanitary conditions. And so the deadline refers to a perimeter they set up before the stockade so nobody could get close to the fence. And the guards, if you even set foot there, they would shoot you. And so the guards used to entertain themselves by throwing food to try to tempt these starving people into reaching for the food, and then they'd shoot them. That's real. That's a real thing. And so for Georgia Gothic, I thought, what better? The deadline. They tossed cornbread black with mold and rat nibbled into the dust just beyond our reach. Our mouths water. We've had no food for days. Living skeletons strong enough to swing a club steal our rations, or palsied fingers drop them into muck. The creek running through the camp, our only water and latrine. No other destination for the draft our bodies slough away, shit and blood and teeth unstuck by scurvy. Another piece plops closer, and we consider reaching out to grab it. Just inches, but certain death because the guards have us in their sights already, waiting. Maybe a mouthful before the ball tears through our skulls. We dream, one wretched bite, one final meal before escaping Andersonville. Actually, was inspired to write that because my son went on a school trip to Andersonville, which it's a park now, and they have preserved that story. And they made the kids line up on a line and play that game to illustrate to them what it would have been like for the prisoners. And that's really where the inspiration came from. So
that's rough. I'm gonna have to add that to my list to go visit. I haven't actually made it out to Andersonville before.
Yeah, it is powerful. Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing that with us. Thanks. So on a slightly lighter note,
on a much lighter note,
yes, it's still a ghost story, but a lot more on the fun end of scale, at least for us horror people. Yeah.
Well, it's a plays around with a story within a story, and so there are two things going on at once, and that is sort of fun. And it also ends up in a much more hopeful place, I think, than Andersonville did. But yeah, so the piece I'm going to read the scene is a group of people sitting around a campfire sharing scary stories, and the narrator gets drawn into letting his friend tell his story for him. And so what you hear is the friend starting to say how this story came about. So when Dave was at Emory, he began, he was renting a room in the Harris house on Todd Road. Oh, the group said. Everyone knew about the Harris house. We joked about Atlanta being too new to be haunted. Houses weren't old enough. Sherman had burned the city down and it had been rebuilt after the war, but some of the oldest houses sat on Virginia highlands, and the Harris house was the oldest one. It hid behind a mini forest of old oaks farther from the street than the others. A once magnificent colonial with steep gables in need of paint, wide porch held up by Dorian columns shaggy from too many coats of paint, and double-story bay windows dim with dust. Todd Road was a stubborn remnant of the original road from downtown, meandering across the grid of planned streets like a drunk uncle at a posh wedding. Old grudges and griefs would hide there, if anywhere. Rent was cheap because of the house's reputation, though nobody knew for sure what had happened there. 8 people murdered, said one guy in the circle. Human experiments in the basement, said another. See, Lloyd said, all kinds of stories. Dave heard the stories, but figured they were all made up. Stories like that never bothered him. But the other guys living there, they told Dave a different story. The last Harris to live there was an old woman, a great-great-grandniece or something. She made the rooms into apartments in the 50s and rented them out to Emory students, sort of played grandmother to the boys, you know, made them cookies and tea and fussed over them when they were sick or hungover. But as she got older, she got more and more strange. She'd talk about stuff like the Battle of Atlanta like it happened last week. Talked about 9 Mile Circle trolley car line and riding it out to the country. Anyway, she got more and more weird as the years went on. First, she'd knock on their doors at night. She would ask, would you like some warm milk? Then stuff like, shall I read you a bedtime story? And finally, she started going into the rooms while they were asleep. They locked the doors, but of course, it was her house. She had all the keys. The last guys who lived there said they'd wake up and she'd be sitting on their bed, rubbing their shoulders, smoothing their hair. And she'd say, are you scared, sweetheart? Don't be scared. That war is an ocean away. Or the firemen have already put the fire out. Or that owl is mourning for someone else. Then she'd sing to them. It was always the same song, a sad old ballad. They could only remember the last 4 lines. One by one around the fire, the dreamers disappear. A lover lost is love's true cost, and dark confound us here.
And that is a fine sample of your story as well. I really like the way that you play with storytelling in that one, and you know, the campfire, you know, and you know, opening up for everybody to start telling stories. That's part of why we wanted to set you a little bit closer to the front of this anthology.
Thank you.
So,
that's nice.
Yeah, really appreciate it. So, did you live in the Harris house when you were going to school?
I lived in a house for one summer that had a story almost exactly the same as this one, not quite as ornate. But a friend of mine talked me into staying there with him for the summer because he said, this house is haunted. Don't you want to be in a haunted house? And I went, you know, okay. And so he told me, he had the story about the old woman that sits on your bed. And in his mind, it was this woman who would be upset if there was any discontent in the house, and she would appear and sue the boys. And I knew it was just bullshit. he made it up, you know, it was completely made up. And so what I decided to do was I'd buy into the story and add to it and see if I could scare him. And so I did, and I really embellished it and added to it and, performed it for him. And it scared the hell out of him. It really did. It was fun that way. And that's why the story took the shape it did, where you have a guy saying, well, this story is not true, but another guy saying, but yes, it is too. And they're competing for who's telling the true story. That's where it all began. So
yeah. And what is the truth? And what, is the truth what you remember, or is truth how others perceive you? What is the true self there? I think
that's
there's
it. That's it.
So many fantastic layers in this.
That's very interesting to me. I remember once telling stories with my siblings about something that happened with mom and dad, and we got through, and my sister said, "I think you guys grew up in a different family from me, because I don't remember it that way at all." And so, if you spin it out, everybody's got a different way of telling the story, and it's fascinating to me how that happens. And what happens to us, as we own the story. So,
and I also love the flavor that you provide. I hope that others who read your story in Georgia Gothic get a feel for Atlanta as you experienced it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I appreciate that. I appreciate the way all of the stories have made Georgia a character. It really is an amazing collection. So I'm very proud to be included.
So to bring it back to this weekend, what is your favorite thing to do at Halloween?
Well, I'll tell you something. What happened this year, which doesn't happen every year, but the theater back in the town where I grew up, and went to the movies for the first time, has been restored. This is in Greenville, Tennessee, and they have done a beautiful job restoring this Art Deco theater that was built in the 30s. And so, that alone is just amazing. And so they were showing Texas Chainsaw Massacre as part of their October thing, and it's the first time I'd seen it on a big screen since the very first time. So I called my brother, and my brother, who knows more about horror movies than anybody in the universe, we went to see it, and it was truly an occasion. It was a big Halloween treat. So
I can imagine. I have only seen that on the small screen, and I can only imagine the sort of impact that would have.
You really feel the heat. I mean, you can see the heat waves coming off of the road. The people sweating. I mean, it really, it feels like 105.
So, well, now, all right, you've succeeded in making me jealous of, I need to go back to the theater again.
Absolutely.
I got my booster shot. I need to go.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you again for joining us tonight, David.
Thank you, Alex. Enjoyed it.
All right. Right. So our final reader for tonight is Kitty Sarkozy. Kitty Sarkozy is a speculative fiction writer, actor, and robot girlfriend. She is an associate editor of Pseudopod, an award-winning weekly horror podcast with the Escape Artist Network. It's a pretty awesome thing. Y'all should listen to it. And Kitty is an alumnus of the Superstars Writing Seminar and member of Dave Farland's Apex Writers group. And several large cats allow her to live with them in Marietta, Georgia. You will probably see one at some point while she's reading.
None of them have shown up. I don't know where they are. They must have moved out.
They're enjoying the brisk autumnal weather.
That's true.
It's a good spooky night. Well, most of them are some variation of black. So
they are, except
for
Toby.
It is their time of year. So Toby is probably around, but the rest.
Yeah, they're hiding. I just remembered I have the heated blanket on in my bedroom. I bet that's where all of them are.
They're probably all piled up on a heated blanket and completely ignoring you.
Yeah, that's what they do.
Dumb minion. So you also grew up in Middle Georgia, and that has inspired much of what you've wrote, including Cicada Tales. What do you want to share with us about Cicada Tales before you take us into your story?
Okay, so I'm going to start kind of near the end this time. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the beginning. So this story is almost completely true. I would say like 90% of this is true because it's from my perspective as a kid. So I lived in Fort Valley, just like Jamie, but I didn't go to Fort Valley High School. I went to Perry High School. I lived on Highway 41. And like, so if you went down Highway 41 towards Centerville and then you turn left, that'll take you over to Jamie's area. So I was like really close to there. But I went to Perry and I lived in a couple different places. Like I lived in Fort Valley at the end, but when I was really, so I started out in Pennsylvania and then I moved to Kathleen, Georgia, which is right beside Bon Air, which is right beside Perry, which is south of Warner Robins, teeny tiny little places. And when I lived in Kathleen, we lived on a farm, sort of. I mean, we had like a lot of plants, like a lot of crops, and we had about 30 hives of honeybees, and we had cows and we had chickens, and the cows were my responsibility. Like when they were babies, it was my job to bottle feed them because we would get 2 steers every year. Sometimes we'd only get 1, but most years we get 2 steers. It would be my job to bottle feed them and get them weaned, and then they would grow for about a year, and then we would have them slaughtered. So what my story is about is my explanation for some of the weird things that happened in my childhood. As an adult, I know what happened, but as a kid, I was like, what the hell? Because sometimes things would just show up at my house. Like one time, my brother came home with a 5-gallon bucket full of candy bars, and my mom was just like, I don't know. Like, there were reasons. So I'm going to start the story with talking about Corn Day. My story's not really super scary. Sorry, y'all. I mean, it is Southern Gothic, but not scary Southern Gothic, really. Okay, so I'm going to start here. One day, almost every summer, they would bring corn, they being the cicadas instead of fairies. My mama would wake up bright and early, a genuine smile on her face. Wake up, she would say. We got a lot of shucking to do. And I would run outside and see a big pile of fresh corn on the hard-packed red clay driveway. The pile was higher than my head and as big around as a car. Anyone living at the house at the time, if they weren't locked in a dream, would come out and help with the work. I got to where I could shuck an ear of corn with one pull. That's still true. All day was spent working on the corn. The kids and the men were outside shucking, and the women were inside cutting it off the ear, boiling it with butter and salt, and then canning it. There was enough corn canned that day to last the whole year. You know, us kids always got sick. You can't help taking bites out of the raw corn while shucking it. The raw corn was sure good. That crunch when you bit into it, sweet and cool, better than any candy a clucking bunny might put in a basket. Green corn tastes like summer. Just like how hot roads under bare feet is what Georgia summer feels like, and the song of the cicadas is what it sounds like. Dinner on Corn Day night was the best, if you weren't too sick to eat by then. On the center of the table would be a big bowl full of extra salty, buttery corn. Something happens to it when it's canned or frozen. Don't ask me to explain the science because I don't know. But the taste changes. It fades out. Heating it back up, even to boiling, can't put it back to that pure sunshine. The cold of the freezer or the dark of the basement kills the magic dead. This was the one day of the year when cut corn tastes like fresh corn on the cob. All of the flavor, none of the greasy fingers and salty face. That corn was so salty that if you ate too much, your lips would get all dry and sore. Yes, there were other things on the table too. There was mashed potatoes, roasted carrots, and fresh bread. My mama got blue ribbons every year at the Georgia National Fair for her bread. I have a few of the cookbooks, but she left out some important ingredients. I'll teach you if you ever decide you want to learn the art. There was fried chicken when I was real young, but in the later years, it was always roast beef. The roast beef was from last year's slaughter. The roast beef from last year's slaughter was always saved for the day the corn came, ever since the shadow cow. It made sense to put them together like that, of course. Haven't I ever told you about the shadow cow? Well, then this is the perfect time to tell you, since it was the cicadas that brought him too. So, those fairies, remember how I said they love to steal things? One of the things they best like to steal is cows. That's a documented fact. They were always going after cows, milk, and butter. Now, I don't know much about fairies since we don't have them here, but I know a bit from reading Celtic folklore. I know that their world isn't like ours, that time runs funny, and that it's full of shadow. The only light there is Pella's swamp gas. Makes sense, they must not naturally grow cows where fairies is supposed to be. When they want a cow, they have to come in the night and take them to fairyland without a trace. I know a lot more about cows than I do about fairies. Every year, we would get a boy cow, 2 if we could afford it, and make them into steers. No, I ain't gonna tell you the details. We would keep the steer until he was big, but not so old as to be tough. Then we would send him to the slaughterhouse. A few days later, they would bring us back freezers full of meat. I ain't gonna lie. When I was little, I cried every year, every time they took my cows away. I couldn't stand the idea of them being killed. I loved them like a dog. Well, once they came back dead and wrapped in white paper, I saw no harm in eating them. You can't unring a bell. The year of the shadow cow was a lean year, and we had just one. He was a brown calf with white spots and boots. The poor thing was lonely and would cry something awful. We only had him a few days. He was young and tiny. I had to feed him powdered milk and water out of a bottle. Not a little bottle like a human baby might use, but a huge bottle. Long as my forearm was back then. I would feed Boots and pet him. I'd keep him company when I could because I felt bad for him. I understood what it was to be alone, but I wasn't a cow, so I couldn't fill that hole in his heart. Boots wanted his mama and the other baby cows from the farm he came from. I think he might have been praying when he mooed. The pain in that lowing sounded like prayer. My mama's cries sounded like that when my brother died. No, not like a cow. Different sound, but the same texture of pain. He wasn't getting past his grieving. He was eating less and didn't even look at me when I petted him. The cicadas heard Boots crying. If there's one thing I know about cicadas, it's that they can't stand to hear anyone suffer if they can do something about it. Cicadas have big hearts in those little crunchy shells. They got together underground in their caves and castles and came up with a plan. I don't know exactly how they did it, because we're not supposed to know that kind of magic. But I know the full moon was important or they would have done it sooner. Boots had been crying well over a week, but it was on the full moon when they helped him. My best guess is it must have had something to do with the shadow cast by the full moon. Or maybe it was the light of the full moon, special magic like Uncle Bill used when he got rid of all my warts. Either way, that's when the cicadas staged their heist. It must have been risky, going up against fairies. Cicadas must be as brave as a bobcat because we already know they ain't stupid. Else they couldn't teach chickens to lay, pick the locks on doors, or remember all the notes of their symphony. Early in the morning, after the full moon, I went out to feed Boots his bottle. It wasn't even all the way light yet. I tried to do my chores early in the summer because I had adventures to get to. The barn was dark still. Boots didn't jump up and run crying to me like he did the other times. He was laying down in the corner in some hay. I was worried that he might have finally given up to the loneliness and died. I knew we couldn't buy another steer, and taking care of him was my job. If he died, it would be my fault, and I would be the recipient of Mama's rage. I ran over to check him, praying he was alive. When I got there, I saw the strangest thing. Unbelievable, even. He was with another cow. Their necks crossed over each other, cuddled up and sound asleep. The other cow was just like Boots in every way, same size, same shape of face, same ears, just like him, save that he was pure black. His coat, his eyes, even his hooves. I ran into the house to tell Mama. At first, she didn't believe me, as seeing things that aren't there is common in our family. I wouldn't let up, and she started to get mad. I wanted to drop it and say I'd made it up, but I knew she would see the cow eventually, and then I'd get a beating for lying. Finally, I convinced her to at least take a look at the cow. She came out and was just as surprised as me. But being older than I am now, she knew more about what happened. She told me that what I just told you about how often cows told fairies. I asked if we could try to find the owner, and she said there was no use. If this calf disappeared a week ago or 100 years ago, since we don't have fairies here, it had to be taken from someplace where they do, like Ireland or France. The people who owned that calf, if they hadn't died of old age, would never expect to see him again. And the cicadas had put him here, so that is where he was meant to be.
I really enjoy all of the fantastic details that you included of Middle Georgia. in your story, and the gentle maliciousness of the cicada fairies. Yeah, I really like they thinking about the cicadas having their own Sealy court is kind of awesomely southern.
Yeah,
So.
they're a fun animal. I've always loved the sound of them. I like the look of them. I tried to eat some one time. I brought them in the house. I put them in a pan. I did the butter. I cooked them. And I actually couldn't put them in my mouth. I was just like, I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't eat this. I can't eat this. But everything that I just read to you was true. I did go outside one day and I did have one cow and he was about to die and he was very sad. And I went out one morning and there was a black Angus calf in my paddock. And I do know what happened now, but I'm not going to tell you.
I appreciate that. And people need to read the remainder of your story to, get, excuse me, a little bit more perspective on that. So, what are your favorite things about Halloween, and what are you looking forward to?
Oh golly, I like the creepiness of it, and I like that everybody who normally isn't creepy kind of gets into the spirit for a little while, and everybody's mind turns towards death and darkness and the beyond. That kind of interests me. And I really like pumpkin spice. I like everything pumpkin spice flavored makes me happy. And candy is awesome. I'm super small, like you can't tell. I'm only 5 foot tall and I only weigh like 120 pounds. So if I put on a costume, I look just like a little kid and I can go out and steal their candy.
You just take a old pillowcase and
Totally
put it over their head and take their pumpkin.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, nobody will know. If I run and then I take off the outfit and I'm a grown woman, I'm like, I'm here taking my kid trick-or-treating. People will think I just lost my kid, not that I stole from theirs.
And on that note, thank you for joining us tonight, Kitty. The last thing that we're going to bring to you from Georgia Gothic tonight is the poem that Peter Salomon wrote specifically for this anthology. Plantation. She'd never been any place but ship, auction, there. Never liked it. No one liked it there. Liked it less the longer she'd been there. Old as the land, the house had fallen into disrepair so long ago, few remembered it was there. Still, there'd been glory here. Glory, yes, and blood. But glory washed away a number of sins, and after a while, she'd stopped counting. Time was, the house entertained visitors just passing through come to pay their respects. Time was, folks knew its name for miles around, wreathed in history it never earned. Time was, she'd pour the tea herself, steeped in hot southern sun and sweetened just enough. Time was, she'd pour the tea, but was never allowed to drink. Still, there'd been war here. War, yes, and death. But war washed away all those questions some might have asked. And after a while, she made sure none survived to ask. She'd never known a person who could keep a secret unless they took it to their grave. Somewhere, she knew a burial awaited her, but she'd survived too much to take dying the easy. Glory fades, wars end. Some need killing who might have lived if they'd been kind. The house was old now, forgotten, with enough glory buried beneath it to take the breath away on a Gothic southern night. Still, she'd never known peace until marching off to fight a private war, and found a sense of glory in carrying a Confederate sword. Sitting quietly on the porch of a fading plantation, she drank all the tea she made, for when she'd broken her master's chains, she'd claimed the house as her own. So I hope you enjoyed these stories from Georgia Gothic. It's a this is a collaborative effort from a number of the members of the Atlanta chapter of the Horror Writers Association. We've got the cover art by Lynn Hansen. We've got interior art by Kelly Frank. We have copy editing and layout from Melissa Hoflick and Vicki Greer, and then edited by myself, Vicki Greer, and Peter Salomon. And you can head over to atlantahwa.com/Georgia-Gothic and get the full table of contents, and you can enjoy the fantastic cover art that we've gotten Jessica to insert into this fantastic video. And so that brings our event to a close. The Southern Nightmares reading series will be a monthly online event presented by the HWA Atlanta Chapter, spotlighting Horror Writers Association members from the Atlanta chapter and around the world. Please join us again next month for another reading series. Until then, honor Halloween in your heart and try and keep it all the year. See you next month, y'all.